A hearty good morning again to the church, also to those on Zoom. It is today, neighbors, we are coming to the end of our fantastic October. First week was friends, and then we went on to relatives, and then we went on to associates, and now this morning it is the neighbors. And thank you for all that has attended and obeying the call. So we are looking forward to continue, Lord's willing, over 12 months, it would be the same. And pray that we all would be still in God's vineyard here on earth, so that we continue this. So this morning we are with the topic of thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. That is what one would call the relevant topic, but the topic is not actually correct. The topic is actually the second commandment. Now, there were these men that questioned the Lord, and on this, as we read in Matthew chapter 22, verse 36, they asked him, "Teacher, which is the great commandment of the law?" Now, because we knew that there was only 10 commandments which God gave Moses, but the Jews, because they wanted to rectify themselves, they kept on adding to the laws. We always have, like when it even came to the marriage laws, there was two rabbis' thoughts that goes into that. Although Jesus did say from the beginning it was not so, but because of your hardness of heart, Moses had to give you a letter of separation, of divorce. So we can see that the Jews always had this manner of reasoning. They did not just take at face value. So therefore they asked Jesus, now what is the great commandment? Teacher, which is the great commandment? Because there were many times that, especially because they are in the rabbinical law, the rabbis, and so each one had a different interpretation, and there was always this dispute about it. And so you had, even in the Jewish religion, you had this faith, and you had that faith, and you had that faith. They were not all one at heart. We even can go to the book of Acts, in which Paul looked at the congregation like this, and he saw the Pharisees, and he saw the Sadducees, and he started talking about the resurrection. And he knew that if I use the word of resurrection, there's going to be a massive dispute here, and they're going to forget all about me, because the Pharisees believed in the resurrection, but the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection, and so there was a dispute amongst them, and they forgot about Paul, so to say. So this is the line of thought when they asked Jesus, "Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law?" Because each one had their own interpretation, because some of them thought that the great commandment is that you should not neglect the sacrifices. Sacrifice is important. And others would say, no, hold it, not the sacrifices, but the feast. The feast is the most important thing. No, the eldest son is the most important. And so you had these disputes. And so they came to Jesus and they said, "Okay, teacher," because they wanted to trap Jesus into his way. Because there was over 600. God just gave 10, but they made over 600 extra laws. And so they asked, hoping that Jesus would side with a particular school or with a particular thought. Now this was Jesus' reaction. He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. He didn't go to the feast. He didn't go to the Sabbath. He did not go to the sacrifices. He said, as God said it in Leviticus 19 and verses 18, he said, this is the great and the first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Now you can just imagine the amazement at the face of all of them when Jesus did not side with any of them. Jesus cut it as it should be done. And so this morning our thought must be, there was the great commandment and there was the second that is equal to the great commandment. And many of us do not look at it in this way, that there is two commandments. The first one, love God with your whole being. And the second to that is, now this was a crushing point to the Jews when it came to this, because just think of in Luke 10 and verses 29, there also became this, who is my neighbor? The one then asked. So this morning our first point that we want to deal with is, who is my neighbor? And it says here in Luke 10 and 29, a lawyer, after understanding the first and the second command, he understood, first command is love God with your whole being, and then the second command is love your neighbor as yourself. Do not forget the word in that sentence, love. Then he asked, well, Lord, then who is my neighbor? And then Jesus started talking, well, let me make it more clear to you. Which now of these, when he gave them the example, there was a man that traveled from Jerusalem, and he fell underneath the thieves, and they left him for dead after stripping him of all his belongings. And there he was laying in the road needing help, and past came a priest and there came a Levite. Remember, these are now two of the echelons of the Jewish religion, a priest and a Levite, and they walked the other way, not even casting an eye to the man that needed. But then along came a Samaritan. Now we must also remember who the Samaritans was. This is why Jesus says, the second to this is love your neighbor as yourself. Because the Jew would say there's a love, but you must check who you need to love. And so, after listening, the Samaritan said, he stopped, dressed the man up, put him on his donkey or mule, and took him to the nearest home, and they say, this is how much I will give for you now, and when I came back, I will, if you had any expenses, now, Jesus said. Now, who was the neighbor? Now, what we find here also is that the neighbor is not actually the person staying next door to you. From this incident, we find that the neighbor is not I'm number 21, number 23. And it's not on the other side, number 17. You see, so who is your neighbor? This is what this lawyer wanted to know. Who is my neighbor? And Jesus said, well, who do you think is the neighbor? And he says, he that showed mercy. He did not even defile his mouth by saying the Samaritan, because even when you say that word, maybe it will put guile into your mouth, like a swear word. He that showed mercy on him, he is my neighbor. Anyone that me and you in our daily life meet and we are of help to that person, that is my neighbor. Be it giving him bread, be it giving him God's word, whatever, as long as it is done in love. That is your neighbor. It is not skin color. It is not any kind of race or any kind of religion that you portray. The one that you attend to. That is your neighbor. So the next point, our second point is, what does it mean to love? Today, many people define love as having a deep emotional behavior. Oh, I'm so in love. And it's just starry skies. It's the stars and moonlight and all these things. And you are filled with some emotions and so on. That is what love means. But when Jesus explains, or when Paul explains, he says in 1 Corinthians and chapter 13, this is, where did I put down my page? My page is all mixed up. I had a page here, but otherwise I must take down my Bible and read it. I don't have my page here. Somewhere it is mixed up there. Let me just, here it is. My fingers. He says in 1 Corinthians 13 and verses 4, 5, 6, and 7. This is what Paul writes about love. No emotions. Love is patient and love is kind. Love does not envy, nor does it boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endure all things. Did you read any starry skies in there? No emotional value of that kind, but it is towards, I can address, I can be patient with someone, I can be kind to someone, I can boast, I do not boast in envy. I'm not arrogant, I'm not rude. I does not, my way, not your way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice, but it has sympathy when there is wrongdoing. It rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures. That is how Paul described what love is. What does it mean to love? Jesus says in John 15 and verses 13, greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. That is how you demonstrate your love to your fellow man. You are prepared to die for that person. Remember, same verse, in the same sentence when Jesus says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. So you can see, Jesus says, we demonstrate love to our neighbor. We must lose ourselves, so to say. Be prepared to give our life for our neighbor. Now, when should I love my neighbor? Proverbs 17 and verse 17 says, a friend loves at all times. There is not a certain times. You love at all times. In other words, you are always in love with the next person. In a spiritual manner. In a manner that pleases God. First of all, when we have the opportunity to demonstrate love. Galatians 6 and verses 10 says, as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men. And he says, especially those of the household of faith. So that is how I should demonstrate love. The second point to demonstrate love is in James 4 and verses 17. He says, therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. So when that Levite walked past, and when that priest went past, they knew they had to do good. So it was sinful for them to walk past. Because James says, if we know how to do good and we do not do it, it is sin. And the third point on how I should love my neighbor, in Acts 2 and verse 45, it says that the disciples or the believers, they sold their possessions and their goods and parted them to all men as every man had need. And so we find that as the last verse of chapter 4 says, just before Ananias and Sapphira, we find that I think it was Barnabas, he sold and he brought the money and laid it at the feet of the apostles. That is how we demonstrate love to our neighbors, when we see that they are in need and we are prepared to assist. Number 4, where should I love my neighbor? Is there a place and time for me to love my neighbor? Yes, in the home. Our society would be a lot better off if we recognize that loving our neighbor begins at home. Don't we have this problem in South Africa today, that the schools are a mess, and the poor teachers has got one cry, don't blame us, it should have happened at your home. But now we find that when it's Friday night, we go and paint the town red, and we leave the children all by themselves. And so they have a hooligan weekend. Our society would be a lot better off if we recognize that loving our neighbors begins at home. There is the temptation to think that when I am at home, in my own house, that I may do what I wish. Is that so? Don't you think that we have responsibility towards our children, in the upbringing of our children? Must we every time go to the book and Proverbs and remind you that you're not just a mother, that you're not just a father, but you've got responsibilities? There is no such excuse in Christianity. Each one of us needs to bow down to that ruling, that I've got a responsibility to my children. The government may say, no beating, but you can beat reasonably. Proverbs says, spare the rod, spoil the child. And that will never, it is forever engraved in heaven. No matter what philosophers and activists and social workers and these people say, you train up the child in the way he should go, and when he's grown up he will not. Husbands are to love their wives, as in Ephesians 5:25, I've just recited. Wives are to love their husbands. It says in Titus 2 verse 4, wives, you must be submissive to your husbands. Parents are to love their children, Ephesians 6 verse 4 and Titus 2 verse 4. Children are to love their parents, Ephesians 6 verse 1 and 2. Love must be the home. If it's not there, you have a problem. I fear that there is a great lack of loving our neighbor in our very homes. Where should I love my neighbor? At work. We just had Associates Day last week. at work, our co-workers are our neighbors. This includes the bosses. It includes your subordinates. It includes your peers. John 13 verse 35 says, "By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one to another." The qualifications is each one that we meet on our way. Where should I love my neighbor? At play. It is tempting when we go on vacation or engage in recreation to just think of ourselves. I'm on holiday. Bible is at home. Teaching, hope it doesn't appear. I'm here at the sea, I'm here at the camp, just don't disturb me. At play, you always need to look and be available to spread the word. Psychologists talk about having the me time. Me time. Me time is to spend it with everyone that has need of you. There is no such exclusive time with the Christian. Once again, we are reminded about we as Christians. There is no me time as a Christian. Philippians 2 and verses 3 states, "Let nothing be done through strife and vainglory, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem others better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others." A loaded verse, Philippians 2 verse 3. Let nothing be done through strife and vainglory. As I had this morning in the Bible study, Paul praising the Thessalonians because from there they became imitators and eventually they became examples to the other provinces. So let nothing be done through vainglory. In public, we also need to teach or love to our neighbor. Jesus said, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." Matthew 5 and verses 16. Whatever we may be, wherever we may be, that is the place to love our neighbor. Whether it's in home, whether it's at play, whether it's at work, any public place, we are to be a neighbor through love. How do I love my neighbor? The parable of the Good Samaritan gives us one answer to this question by showing mercy. Paul tells us to keep God's command is showing love for our neighbors. He says, "For this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witnesses, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law." Romans 13, verse 9 to 10. There is 10 commandments. And as I said, Christ said, there's the great commandment, that is the 10. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. And there's the second one. And Paul just brought our attention. Thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet, and any other commandment. It is briefly comprehended in the saying, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Love works no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Love will also compel one to tell others the message of the gospel. It is so compelled by God. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. God demonstrated it. If we could love that manner, then we can also love our neighbor. If we love our neighbor, we will respect God's commands and teach them the truth about their salvation. Lastly, why should I love my neighbor? Why should I love? Because God commands it. James says it is the royal law. And it was so beautiful for you. You know, we read the Bible. But sometimes, I don't say we glance at we read to understand. But sometimes pop up a word which so beautiful, and I rush to the verse to go and see, is it really so? Royal law. James says, if you fulfill the royal law according to the scriptures, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, you do well. James 2 and verse 8. I was so amazed. I was so blessed. I felt so fulfilled that I could read there that it was the royal law. Because it is the natural result of practicing the golden rule. Why should I love my neighbor? The golden rule says in Matthew 7:12, therefore all things whatsoever you would do to men, that men should do to you, do even so to them. Whatever I want men to do to me, likewise I do to them. Why should I love my neighbor? Because it promotes peace and harmony among men. Romans 12 and verses 18 declares it. If it be possible, as much as lies in you, live peaceably with all men. Now, as we have been coming together to be exhorted and to be strengthened and be given the wisdom from God, love thy neighbor as you love yourself. Let us continue to let this light so shine before men so that God can get all the glory and the honor. Let it start from now on. If we have thought it was just my next door neighbor, and you have learned now this morning that it is a much wider circle, go and do likewise. We're going to have our invitation hymn.